A fugitive hands her suitcase to a stranger at Grand Central. But he was a millionaire, and what he finds inside shocks everyone. Please leave a comment and rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. Morning steam rose from coffee cups scattered across the benches of Grand Central Terminal, mingling with the biting chill that made commuters hunch deeper into their coats. The constant bustle of hurried individuals created an urban symphony of footsteps, hushed conversations, and distorted announcements blaring from the loudspeakers. Amidst this chaos, a man in his early 30s stood out for his effortless elegance, wearing an Italian wool overcoat that cost more than most people there made in a year. His upright posture and the Swiss watch on his wrist betrayed a life of privilege, built on a fortune inherited from his father, a hotel empire spanning several major cities across the country. He was waiting for the express train that would take him to yet another business meeting, idly flipping through the pages of the Wall Street Journal, when his blue eyes caught a desperate movement in the crowd. A woman was running towards him with an urgency that cut through the air like a blade, her footsteps echoing against the marble floor of the station. Her simple, worn clothes contrasted sharply with her surroundings, and her red, swollen eyes revealed hours of tears. She clutched an old faux leather suitcase, scratched and patched, telling stories of hard travels and sleepless nights. Without warning or explanation, the stranger deposited the bag into the surprised businessman's hands, her trembling fingers briefly brushing his in an involuntary connection that sent a jolt through his body. "Please," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "Take care of her as if she were your own life." The words came out as a desperate plea, loaded with a weight he couldn't fully comprehend. Before he could react or ask any questions, the mysterious woman vanished into the throng of commuters, her hurried footsteps disappearing into the echoing cavern of Grand Central as if she had never existed. The millionaire remained there, frozen like a statue, holding the strange suitcase while trying to process what had just happened. People continued to stream past him as if nothing had occurred, as if this surreal encounter was merely a figment of his imagination. Throughout the train ride to the meeting, he couldn't concentrate on the profitability charts or the profit projections that usually dominated his thoughts. The suitcase occupied the seat next to him like a disturbing presence, and he found himself wondering who the woman was and why she had chosen him to entrust with something that seemed so precious. His fingers drummed nervously on the table as he tried to decipher the mystery that had literally fallen into his hands. The meeting was a complete disaster. His mind was utterly detached from the discussions about stock investments and expansion of the family business, even when the numbers presented represented millions in potential growth. His partners noticed his distraction, and he invented an excuse about health problems to end the meeting early. The wealth he had accumulated over the years seemed insignificant compared to the suitcase that held unknown secrets. Back at his mansion late in the afternoon, he climbed the marble staircase leading to his bedroom, carrying the bag as if it were a bomb about to explode. The walls, covered with contemporary art and the Italian designer furniture, seemed to judge his growing curiosity. He placed the suitcase on the king-size bed and contemplated it for long minutes, battling against the voice of conscience that warned him about violating someone's privacy. Curiosity won out over moral scruples. With trembling hands, he opened the first compartment and found simple women's clothes, carefully folded despite the cheap, worn fabric. There was a cotton blouse with a small hole in the elbow, faded jeans that had seen better days, and underwear patched with such care that it almost made him close the suitcase again. At the bottom, his fingers touched something soft, and he pulled out a small rag doll, clearly handmade, with yellow yarn hair and an embroidered smile that had faded with time. But it was in the side compartment that he found what would completely change the course of his tranquil existence. Official documents revealed the identity of a 4-year-old girl who had disappeared from the newspaper headlines weeks before. Polaroid photographs showed a child with big, expressive eyes, smiling innocently at the camera while holding the same rag doll that was now in his hands. The papers spoke of an ongoing investigation, a mother wanted by the authorities on vague charges of abandonment, and a daughter who had been separated from her family in circumstances that the documents did not fully clarify. The millionaire's heart raced as he understood the magnitude of what he had received. This was not just an ordinary suitcase. It was a disguised cry for help, a silent scream from a desperate mother who had entrusted him with the most important task of her life. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach, and he sat heavily on the edge of the bed, still holding the small doll while trying to absorb the responsibility that had fallen on his shoulders. The following weeks transformed the businessman's meticulous routine into a whirlwind of obsessive investigations. His days, previously filled with investment spreadsheets and financial reports on the growth of his hotel chain, were now consumed by tireless online searches, calls to private investigators, and visits to places he had never imagined frequenting. The rag doll remained on his desk as a constant reminder of the responsibility he had accepted, its embroidered eyes seeming to watch him with a mixture of hope and despair. The first private investigator he hired was an experienced man with decades of solved cases, but even he was intrigued by the complexity of the situation. The documents found in the suitcase revealed only fragments of the story. A nurse referred to in the press only as the neglectful mother had been accused of medical malpractice that had resulted in serious complications for a patient. The newspaper headlines painted a devastating picture of professional incompetence, but something in the details didn't quite fit the official narrative. During 2 weeks of intensive investigation, spending a considerable amount of his personal wealth, the millionaire discovered that the woman worked at a public hospital on the outskirts of the city, a place where precarious conditions and overwork made medical errors almost inevitable. She had been held responsible for a series of complications that occurred during her night shift, but witnesses mentioned irregularities in the internal investigation process that preceded her dismissal and the opening of the lawsuit. The first major breakthrough came when the investigator discovered that the nurse had not simply fled out of cowardice, as the official report suggested. She was hiding in a temporary shelter for women in vulnerable situations, located in a neighborhood that the businessman had to drive through with the windows closed, shocked by the reality of extreme poverty that existed just a few miles from his mansion. The contrast was stark. While he accumulated profits from his financial investments, entire families lived in conditions that defied human dignity. The shelter was a simple brick building with peeling walls and a small courtyard where children played with makeshift toys. When he finally found her, working as a night cleaner in a medical office near the shelter, the impact was much greater than he had anticipated. She was thinner, with deep circles under her eyes that betrayed sleepless nights, but her eyes maintained a steely determination that deeply impressed him. She wore a patched cleaning uniform and carried cleaning supplies in a makeshift cart, working in silence to earn enough to support her daughter. The first meeting between them was fraught with tension and distrust. She immediately recognized him as the man from Grand Central, and her initial reaction was pure panic. "Did you call the police?" she asked, her voice trembling, ready to flee again if necessary. When he explained that he had found the documents and wanted to help, she laughed bitterly, a sound that cut through the air like broken glass. "Men like you don't help people like me without expecting something in return," she replied, her eyes shining with a mixture of anger and despair. Her resistance was understandable, but it also awakened in him a determination he didn't know he possessed. During the following days, he returned to the office every night, bringing food, medicine for her young daughter, and offers of financial assistance that she systematically refused. The 4-year-old girl, who actually appeared to be only 2 due to malnutrition, was being cared for by an elderly woman at the shelter, a kind-hearted woman who could barely support herself with her meager pension. A sexual tension began to grow unexpectedly and intensely during these nightly visits. He arrived at the office always after business hours, when she was alone, cleaning the rooms and organizing the medical equipment. The empty hallways and soft lighting created an intimate atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the professional nature of their encounters. She wore her hair pulled back in a simple bun, revealing the elegant curve of her neck, and when she bent down to clean the floor, he found himself watching the gracefulness of her movements, even in such a humble task. The conversations between them slowly evolved from mutual distrust to cautious curiosity. She began to tell fragments of her story, how she had graduated in nursing with great sacrifice, working during the day and studying at night, dreaming of providing a better life for her daughter. He shared details of his own loneliness, of a life built on privileges he had never questioned, of superficial relationships with women who were only interested in his wealth and social status. The second major breakthrough came when she finally accepted his help to hire a competent lawyer, someone who could investigate the irregularities in her case. The professional, paid with the businessman's resources, discovered evidence that the supervisor responsible for the internal investigation of the hospital had manipulated documents and pressured witnesses to lie in their testimonies. The discovery revealed a pattern of corrupt behavior that had been going on for years, with other employees being unfairly blamed for errors they had not committed. For an entire month, they worked together to gather evidence, spending hours in the lawyer's law library, analyzing documents and identifying inconsistencies in the official reports. The physical proximity during these intense study sessions intensified the attraction that grew between them. Their fingers touched accidentally when they flipped through the same documents. Their eyes met for seconds that seemed like eternities, and the air between them was charged with an electricity that neither knew how to handle. The little girl had become a special link between them. On the few occasions when he visited her at the shelter, she ran into his arms, calling him "handsome uncle," a nickname that melted his heart and awakened in him a paternal instinct he didn't know he possessed. He brought expensive toys and new clothes, but she always preferred the old rag doll, creating imaginary games where the 3 of them formed a happy family. The child's innocence contrasted painfully with the complexity of the situation the adults faced. The 3rd month of investigations brought complications that neither had anticipated. The corrupt supervisor of the hospital, a middle-aged man with influential political connections, discovered that someone was deeply investigating the case of the nurse he had worked so hard to cover up. His reaction was immediate and brutal. He began to pressure colleagues, superiors, and even contacts in the press to have the woman officially wanted by the police, turning an already delicate situation into a real manhunt. The newspaper headlines changed drastically for an entire week. The neglectful nurse was now portrayed as a dangerous fugitive who had abandoned her daughter and was avoiding facing the consequences of her criminal acts. The businessman watched this transformation of the narrative with a mixture of anger and helplessness, realizing for the first time in his life how money and influence could shape public perception of reality. Even with all his fortune accumulated through successful investments, he discovered that there were limits to what his wealth could buy. The pressure on the nurse intensified brutally. She was forced to leave the temporary shelter and hide in increasingly precarious locations, taking her young daughter on a desperate journey of escape that tested the limits of human endurance. They slept in different shelters each night, in overcrowded rooms where privacy was a non-existent luxury and security a dangerous illusion. The girl began to show signs of stress, wetting the bed and having constant nightmares that made her wake up screaming in the middle of the night. The millionaire found himself immersed in a world he knew nothing about, using his network of contacts and financial resources to create a protective network around the woman and the child. He rented safe apartments, hired lawyers specialized in criminal law, and even paid informants to monitor the movements of the corrupt supervisor. His monthly expenses, previously focused on fixed income applications and stocks on the stock exchange, were now directed towards a silent war against a system that seemed determined to destroy an innocent family. During this turbulent period, the intimacy between him and the nurse grew intensely and complicatedly. They met in safe apartments he had rented, small and simple spaces that contrasted sharply with the luxury he was accustomed to. She prepared simple meals with the few ingredients available, and he discovered he had never tasted food as delicious as that made with so much care and gratitude. Their fingers brushed when she served him a plate, and the air between them crackled with an electricity that became harder to ignore with each encounter. The third twist came when the businessman's family discovered his involvement with the criminal plastered across the newspaper headlines. His older sister, an influential socialite married to a prominent politician, organized a family intervention that was a full-blown emotional ambush. "You've completely lost your mind," she screamed in his living room, gesturing dramatically while other relatives watched in awkward silence. "You're risking our family reputation, our businesses, everything our father built, for a woman you barely know." The family threats were real and concrete. They talked about disinheriting him, removing his name from the family company, cutting off all financial ties that sustained his luxurious lifestyle. The wealth he had grown through inheritance and savvy investments could vanish with a simple family board meeting. For the first time in his life, he faced the real possibility of losing everything he had taken for granted, and the feeling was both terrifying and strangely liberating. The internal pressure intensified when he realized that his involvement with the nurse was putting her and her daughter in even greater danger. The corrupt supervisor had discovered his identity and began using his connections to pressure local authorities to investigate the businessman for obstruction of justice and aiding and abetting a criminal. The situation turned into a dangerous game of chess, where every move could result in devastating consequences for everyone involved. During 2 particularly difficult weeks, the nurse seriously considered turning herself into the authorities to protect both her daughter and the man who had become her savior and her secret passion. She watched the girl playing with the rag doll in a corner of the safe apartment and felt her heart break at the thought of being separated from her again. "Maybe it's better this way," she murmured to him during the wee hours when they stayed awake, talking about the uncertain future. "You don't deserve to have your life ruined because of me." The fourth twist came in the form of an accidental discovery that completely changed the course of the investigation. While analyzing medical records from the hospital, the lawyer hired by the businessman noticed strange discrepancies in the hours reported during the nurse's fateful shift. The official records didn't match the electronic timekeeping systems, suggesting that someone had deliberately altered the data to frame the innocent woman. This discovery opened up a new line of investigation that revealed a systematic pattern of evidence tampering. The sexual tension between the businessman and the nurse reached a breaking point during a particularly stressful night when they were trapped in the safe apartment during a local curfew. The daughter slept soundly in the next room, exhausted by the constant changes and insecurities. They sat on the small living room sofa, closer than they had ever been, and he could smell the faint scent of her inexpensive soap mixed with the aroma of her freshly washed hair. "Why are you doing all this for us?" she asked in a whisper, her eyes shining in the soft light of the living room lamp. He didn't know how to answer with words, because the truth was too complex to be explained rationally. It had started as a sense of justice, evolved into compassion, and now transformed into something much deeper and scarier. When their lips touched for the first time, it was a desperate kiss, charged with fear, hope, and a passion that had grown silently during months of intense cohabitation. Her hands explored his face with a tenderness that contrasted with the urgency of their racing hearts. The physical intimacy that grew between them that night was interrupted by the cruel reality of their situation when she abruptly pulled away, remembering that each stolen moment of happiness could be the last before everything crumbled. "We can't," she whispered with tears in her eyes. "It's not fair to you, it's not fair to her." But the connection had been established, and both knew there was no going back to the purely professional relationship they had tried to maintain. The next 2 months tested the limits of the emotional endurance of everyone involved. The nurse struggled against her own feelings, knowing that each day alongside the businessman made her fall more deeply in love with a man who represented everything she could never have. He, in turn, faced increasingly intense family pressures, with concrete threats of being removed from the board of directors of the hotel company he had helped build. His personal investments in stocks began to be questioned by the other partners, who feared that his emotional instability could negatively affect the company's profits. The situation became untenable when the corrupt supervisor managed to convince an ambitious district attorney to issue an official arrest warrant for the nurse. The news was released in the newspapers with sensational headlines that portrayed her as a dangerous criminal who endangered the lives of innocent patients. The safe apartment where she was hiding with her daughter became a claustrophobic prison, with the girl constantly asking when they could go home, a question that broke the heart of the mother who didn't know how to answer. The fifth twist came through an unexpected source. An older nurse who had worked at the hospital for decades and silently observed the supervisor's irregularities finally decided to break her silence. She approached the lawyer hired by the businessman and revealed devastating information. The supervisor had not only forged evidence against his colleague, but was also involved in a scheme to divert controlled medications that had been going on for years. The drugs were sold on the black market, and when regulatory authorities made inspections, he blamed innocent employees for the disappearances. The independent investigation that followed, funded by the resources that the millionaire had directed to the case, revealed a network of corruption that involved other hospital employees, dishonest suppliers, and even some members of the local health administration. The scheme had resulted in the deterioration of the clinical picture of dozens of patients who did not receive the proper medications. A discovery that transformed the case from a simple accusation of negligence into a scandal of much greater proportions. During this period of explosive revelations, the tension between the businessman and the nurse reached its apex. They spent entire days together in the lawyer's office, analyzing documents and preparing the defense, their bodies touching accidentally as they leaned over the evidence. The constant physical proximity, combined with the emotional pressure of the situation, created moments of stolen intimacy that left them even more vulnerable to each other. He observed the determination in her eyes when she explained technical details about medical procedures, and she got lost in the way he focused entirely on understanding every aspect of the case, dedicating his intelligence and resources to save her. The sixth twist was the most painful of all. The businessman's family, desperate to end what they considered a destructive obsession, hired a private investigator to find compromising information about the nurse. The professional discovered that she had had a previous relationship with a married man, a doctor at the very hospital where she worked, and that this relationship had ended traumatically when the wife discovered the affair. The information was used by the family as proof that she was a home wrecker who was emotionally manipulating the businessman for financial gain. The revelation of this information created the first major fight between the couple. She felt betrayed for having her privacy invaded and humiliated for having her past exposed so cruelly. "You think I don't know how people see me?" she screamed through bitter tears. "A poor, desperate woman who takes advantage of rich men. That's what your family thinks, and maybe they're right." He tried to console her, explaining that he had not authorized this investigation, but the damage was done. The trust they had built so carefully was shaken to its foundations. For 2 agonizing weeks, they barely spoke, communicating only through the lawyer about matters related to the case. The little girl felt the tension between the adults and began to behave even more withdrawn, hugging her rag doll as if it were the only stable thing in a world that seemed to be crumbling around her. The businessman plunged into a deep depression, questioning all his decisions and wondering if he had really helped or just made the situation worse for the family he was trying to protect. The 7th and biggest twist of all came when the official investigation finally revealed the full extent of the corruption scheme in the hospital. The corrupt supervisor, facing irrefutable evidence of his crimes, decided to make a deal with the district attorney and confessed not only to the diversion of medications, but also to the deliberate manipulation of the evidence that incriminated the nurse. The confession was recorded and became the centerpiece of a process that completely exonerated the woman and exposed the true extent of the injustice she had suffered. The media, which had been so cruel in its initial condemnation, now turned completely to the other side, portraying her as a wronged heroine and victim of a corrupt system. The headlines changed from "neglectful nurse" to "victim of hospital conspiracy," and public apologies began to appear in the same outlets that had destroyed her reputation months before. The hospital was forced to pay substantial compensation, and she was officially reinstated with all labor rights restored. With her innocence proven and her reputation restored, the nurse was finally able to come out of hiding and begin to rebuild her life. The first place she visited was the businessman's mansion, where she found him in his office, surrounded by financial papers that he couldn't concentrate on reading. When she appeared at the door with her little daughter running ahead of her yelling, "Handsome uncle," he knew the moment of truth had arrived about the future of all of them. The conversation that followed was charged with raw emotion and brutal honesty. She apologized for having doubted his intentions, and he apologized for not better protecting her privacy. Both recognized that the love that had grown between them during months of shared suffering was real and deep, but also that they needed to face the social differences that still separated them. "I love you," she finally admitted, "but I don't know if I can live in your world without losing who I really am." His answer came in the form of a proposal that surprised even himself. Instead of asking her to adapt to his world of luxury and privilege, he suggested that they build something completely new together. Using part of his fortune and her medical knowledge, they would create a social project to support health professionals in vulnerable situations, offering free legal advice, temporary financial support, and reintegration programs for those who were unfairly accused or persecuted in their workplaces. The 8th twist was the unexpectedly positive reaction of part of his family to this proposal. His younger sister, who had remained silent throughout the crisis, revealed that she had always admired his courage to fight for justice, even risking everything. Some important investors also showed interest in the social project, seeing it as an investment opportunity with a positive impact on society. The gradual support of influential people helped transform what had started as a family scandal into a respected and admired initiative. Their wedding, held exactly 1 year after their first meeting at Grand Central Terminal, was a celebration that blended simplicity and elegance. The ceremony took place in the garden of his mansion, decorated with simple flowers that she had chosen personally. The little girl, now 5 years old and visibly healthier and happier, served as a bridesmaid, carrying the same rag doll that had been a silent witness to the entire family journey. When she finally called him Daddy during the party, there wasn't a dry eye among the guests. In the months that followed, the social project they created together began to show impressive results. Dozens of unfairly accused health professionals received legal and financial support, and several similar corruption networks were exposed and dismantled. The nurse returned to work, but now as medical coordinator of the project, using her personal experience to help others going through similar situations. The businessman discovered a satisfaction in his work that he had never experienced simply accumulating personal wealth. The story ended with them celebrating their second wedding anniversary at a simple party at the same shelter where she had hidden during the most difficult months. The women and children who still resided there received them as heroes, and the little girl, now a talkative and confident child, told everyone how her parents met, when Mommy was very sad and Daddy helped her to be happy again. The transformation of all of them was evident. He had learned that true wealth lay in genuine human connections. She had recovered not only her professional dignity, but also the ability to trust in love, and the child had gained a stable and loving family. The suffering they had faced together had transformed into the solid foundation of a love that promised to last forever, proving that even in the most difficult circumstances, hope and determination can create real miracles.